Welcome to the list. Welcome to the list.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the List podcast. I'm Wendy.
And I'm Cameron.
Oh, Cameron, hello. How are you today?
Doing good. Good.
Yeah, we
Yourself?
just had it. We've actually just been chatting for the last 2 hours, and we just got to get things done, and we're going to get this podcast done today, and that's great. So today we're going to dive into a topic that's near and dear to the both of us: books, and what we read, and how we read, and what you should read, or our recommendations.
So yeah, if you're new to the list, welcome. Welcome to the list. This is kind of our ultimate roundup of all the things that are important to us. As I mentioned before, the list kind of came out of many years of talking to people where we would say, "Hey, have you read this book?" And they would go, "Oh, I haven't. I've never even heard of it." And you go, "How have you not seen this?" So this is our collection of the things that are on our list, the things that are important to us, and the things that you really should probably check out.
Yeah, really, really. So, like Cameron mentioned, we've done two. The first one was on movies. The second was TV. So I just wanted to recap of what we missed last time. Does that sound good, Cameron?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay, so what we missed. Okay, confession time. The last episode, I totally blanked out on something that was just so important to me, and I was just like, gum stopped? What's the word? I don't know anymore. And we were talking about movies, and I forgot to mention the brilliant and absurd and totally iconic Monty Python series. And, it wasn't just a bunch of movies. It was groundbreaking TV series that redefined sketch comedy and John Cleese, hilarious and faulty Towers, dry, awkward, ridiculous, peak British humor. Canadians, I think, really connect with that thanks to our British roots.
And arguably, we probably missed it because we did an episode on movies and they made movies. And we did an episode of TV shows and they did TV shows. And I think part of my brain assumed we'd covered in the other episode while we were doing it.
Right.
But yeah, Monty Python, they're a thing, right? The other one that I was thinking about that I totally missed that was part of my life. I remember I think we wore out the old VHS tapes. Remember wearing out VHS tapes? Was the Jeeves and Woosters series. Did you ever see Jeeves and Woosters?
No. God, never heard of it.
Old British comedy. Great. It's a butler and his Sir Wooster. And it's a dry British humor again with all that same kind of stuff. What was amazing about it was I was raised on Jeeves and Woosters. We watched every single episode hundreds of times, right, over and over again. And then years later, I'm sitting watching a television show with somebody called House. And this main character just rings a bell. But I can't place him because this American playing this doctor, he looks like somebody. And I realized, oh my God, it's the same guy with the thickest British accent you've ever heard from Jeeves and Wooster. And just wonderful, right? So Hugh Laurie, fantastic guy. Stephen Fry, amazing person. The stuff he's done. If you like trivia, go watch QI. Amazing television show. Lots of great stuff. Totally missed that stuff. I don't know how we missed it.
There's it's an interesting conversation to really realize that there's so many British actors out there that do a great American accent. And there's one woman who I read her book, Want, speaking of books to read. Mm-hmm. And she was for the longest time on this American series, Twilight Zone. Here we go again with my brain that I can't remember, and I should just not break away from our script because then all of a sudden my brain goes blank. But we'll come back to that in the next segment or the next episode, and talk about those sort of funny things. So, what's our next segment that we're going to talk about today?
So I think our first segment, we're just going to talk a little bit about reading, about what people are doing in the world with reading, maybe a little bit of a renaissance going on.
Yeah, the reading resonance, the resonance. It sounds like my favorite type of music. So, have you noticed that everyone seems to be reading again? Like everywhere I look, on the subway, in coffee shops, TikTok, it's books, books, books.
Uh, Personally, not entirely, because I teach, so I deal with a lot of what are they these days? Are they Gen Alpha kids coming up throughout university? I don't know. They're youngins. They don't read. They when I say go read the text paragraph of the textbook, they can't read the questions that I'm giving them for homework. Having said that, I have noticed more and more of them are saying they do read or they've read a book in the last year. I'm finding more and more friends. I'm trying to think of what the word is. Confessing to actually reading, right? I think what's going on in the reading renaissance right now is probably less people reading more and more of people not thinking it's cool to say I don't read anymore.
Well, and it's again, the environment you're in. You're teaching at a university. You're dealing with your students. You're not in the subway. I've been in the subway, and I see people reading all the time, but they're
Mhm.
not reading actual physical books. They're either listening to Audible or they're reading books on their phones or their iPads or whatever in the subway. But I have noticed this trend because certainly when I go to the store, to Indigo at the Eaton Center here in downtown Toronto, it's packed with young people. There's an entire table dedicated to book talk. So there's this whole, yeah, of course, a lot of people are on TikTok, but a lot of young people are getting their book recommendations from this book talk part of TikTok. And so there's things like Book Talk, uh, Bookstagram, and even celebrity book clubs. So I'm seeing a lot more book clubs popping up with celebrities. And you have Witherspoon, Barack Obama, but look at Oprah with her book
Yep.
club, and there's lots of other ones like that.
Yep. As you're
So
talking there, I wonder if part of this too, and we're going to talk about this later. You mentioned audiobooks and ebooks and everything else. I've noticed with my students that if I ask my students, have you read a book in the last year, 2 years, 3 years? In the past, it would have been a hard no. Nope, don't read. I don't read. And I think we're going to talk about it a lot today. There is more of, I don't want to say it's acceptance, but more of a discussion of, yes, I did. I listened to a book last month. And not, no, I don't read, but I do listen to audiobooks. No, the same thing, right? Or
it's
I,
considered reading though when you listen to an
exactly, right?
audiobook.
Or even some, we're getting to a point now where people can be like, no, I didn't read a book, but now just say, yes, I read a book. I was reading a graphic novel the other day, or I read a website blog, or like it's all reading. I'm not saying, did you read Shakespeare? I'm
So
saying, are you reading, period, full stop, however
yeah,
it's coming in, right? And
yeah.
I think that might be what this reading renaissance is this more of an openness to this discussion of how can you read? Yes or no? Yes. Cool. What are you reading? Tell me, right? Like, don't, I'm no judgment. No, if it's not War and Peace, it's not real reading, right? I think that might be why we're seeing more people, quote unquote, reading, because nobody ever stopped. We just stopped agreeing what reading was.
And the thing is that I was at one point 2 years ago, I was taking the subway or I was working in a room of with young millennials, and I always see them walk into the office wearing their headphones. And at one point, I started asking them. I said, "Whoa, what music are you listening to?" And they said, "I'm not. I'm listening to a podcast." Oh, and then it was like, "Oh no, I'm doing an audiobook." Or it's the variations of what people are doing in their head or in their headphones
Mhm.
is stuff that we're not as aware of anymore. We're not physically seeing, like when you see in a picture, a black and white picture, like even from the 30s or 40s, and you see a lineup of men waiting for a job. They all are holding a newspaper in front of them. They're
Yeah.
all reading a newspaper. Now, when you get on the subway and they're on the way to work, they're all looking at their phones, and 90% of them have headphones on.
Yeah.
So you They may be reading. They may be listening to an iPod podcast. They may be just scrolling on the internet. Like now, even more because the Toronto TTC finally woke up and said, "Oh, we should offer a cell service in the subways." Duh. But anyways, a lot more.
You're talking about the book renaissance, huge thing, and I think a lot of people. Back to my point about the pandemic and my first students, I think a lot of my students did have more time. They had more quietness. They had more space to have a way to connect with a book and read. So I think that's partly what we're seeing here.
Okay, all right.
But,
Well,
yeah.
let's get on to our next segment.
Yes.
So our relationship with books.
So me and books, we go back a long way. I was not a big reader as a kid. I definitely remember having to read many books, To Kill a Mockingbird, Shakespeare, various books for school. I never really enjoyed a lot of them. I very rarely would read books. I know part of that, probably not related, but I had a friend I grew up with who would read, I kid you not, War and Peace in an afternoon. I don't know how. They would have
Wow.
these massive books and you'd go, hey, what are you reading? Oh, I'm reading this book. Cool, you're just starting. And then a couple hours they go, that was a great book. And you'd look at them and go, wait, what? And they would devour books, right? We go away for a weekend camping and they'd bring 12 books. And I'd be like, I haven't read 12 books in my life so far. And Saturday afternoon they go, I should have brought more books.
Okay.
Just unbelievable. So my relationship with books was not great. Had a couple books I liked. I'll talk about them later. Pivotal book for me that changed how I changed my relationship with books, and I will. This is in my list later. Was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I remember getting it. Honestly, I can't remember where I got it from now, but I got it, and for a number of different reasons, I was traveling on a bus over a weekend. Very busy, just kind of sit around and shut. It was one of those hurry up and wait kind of weekends. And I blitzed the whole thing, all 5 parts in a weekend. Huge book, 72 hours, done. And it made me think. I was thinking like, this was a good book. I really wanted to keep reading it. Probably one of the first books I can really remember that I thought like, I'll just read one more chapter. Just one more chapter. Just a little bit more, right? And that made me really kind of change my relationship with books. And then years ago, probably at least a decade ago, I brought a book camping, and it kind of changed again where I kind of went, yeah, I need quiet. I need focus. I need books, because up until then I've always had, 1 or 2 books on the go. I'd read a book a year maybe, but in the last couple of years, it's really changed, and I'll talk about that more.
Yeah. Well,
What about you, Blaine?
the fantasy part, taking you off to another world, I totally get that now. And the thing is that what I was going to talk about is that reading is something that is just began 3 years ago for me. And we've talked about this in the past, but I just want to picture this. Little me, little Wendy in grade 5, proudly running the Scholastic Book Club. Like it was my own personal publishing empire. I strutted into class. I handed out those glossy book catalogs like golden tickets and watched my classmates who were circling their wish lists. And a few weeks later, bam, a magical box of books would land in our classroom. And this was in Don Mills at Karen Road Public School. And let me tell you, it was like a Christmas level excitement. I'd crack open that box, inhale the glorious smell of new books, and I still secretly, when I go to Indigo at the Eaton Center, I smell a book. I don't know what it is about the book smell, but I love it. And then you play fairy. You hand them out, each title, like I was Oprah. You get a book, and you get a book, and you get a book. But here's the twist, a plot twist, if you will. I couldn't actually read any of these books. I undiagnosed with dyslexia. So this is 1968. I was in grade 5. I had dyslexia, and nobody knew it, and I didn't know it. So while everyone else is diving into their adventures and mysteries, I was on the sidelines, frustrated and secretly heartbroken. I wanted to read so badly. but the words just wouldn't make sense to me. So, what did I do instead? I escaped into the wild and wacky world of comics and Mad Magazine and Archie comics, all sorts of comics. Yeah, Mad Magazine. I had, I don't know why, but I think my parents actually bought me a subscription to Mad Magazine because I had the first Mad Magazine. And I
I think
recently
I got
saw,
yours. I don't know where I got mine from either.
so, Spy versus Spy, the magical fold-in back covers, all that kind of stuff. It was so much fun. And so, like I mentioned, fast forward through childhood and adulthood, and reading was still something I just couldn't do. And just 3 years ago, cue dramatic music. I discovered audiobooks, woohoo, and changed everything. And suddenly books were accessible to me. I could experience the stories, the knowledge, and music and magic finally, and I've been making up for lost time ever since. It's been absolutely life-changing. So yeah, to the shout out to little Wendy, the book club boss who couldn't read the books, but I never gave up on the dream.
And shout out to dyslexia in general. You made me think about something. One of the things that did change my way of reading is I've always struggled to read, right? As I said, I would read like 1 or 2 books every year or two. People would ask, what are you reading? And like, were you reading that a year ago? Yes, I'm still reading it. Because when I was a kid and I read, I would start at the top of the page. I would get at the bottom of the page. No idea what would happen. Or I would get halfway down the page and just lose where I was. And it was quite a few years ago, the Libby app, which is what our library uses, has font selections. And one of the font selections is the Open Dyslexic font. And although, as far as I know, I'm not dyslexic, I have found reading those 1,000 times easier.
I have just learned something new from you. I didn't even know that exists. The Open Dyslexia font?
Yes, and there's a lot of research on how this font works. I don't know how it works, but it sure works for me.
I got to check this out.
I can read a book and it keeps you focused and it keeps you on the words. And
wow.
And it's one of those things I remember when I found it probably about a decade ago, and it's still not easy. I was looking into how do I make all the text on my computer like this? It's doable. It's really, really hard. It's more of a pain in the butt.
Okay.
But it does exist. And so my point, my shout out to dyslexia here is if you struggle reading at all, if you find reading a book difficult, boring, slow, we'll talk about some tips later. Try the Open Dyslexia font and see if it makes a difference. Because for me, it went from kind of a wash of characters on a page to reading words.
Interesting. Yeah, so that takes us to our next section, tips on reading more.
Yeah.
So here's some top 10 top reading hacks that we came up with. Use audiobooks. But now this Open Dyslexia font, which is great. Yeah. I pair audio with Kindle at the same time. And even the words stick more when you're listening and reading at the same time. Yep. That I find really, really helps with reading. Highlighting key ideas, especially for nonfiction. So I have books that I have read on my Kindle, and I highlight them in the Kindle. And physical books, I also use a highlighter. And even though I'm not in school, I can highlight all I want in my books. I own the books. It's no problem. But it might sort of remind you of, oh, you're not in school. Why are you highlighting things in your book? Well, because I think it's important to look back at the book and say, I wanted to highlight this because I want to remember this. Listening to books while you're doing your chores, your dishes, you're going for a walk, you name it. And then choosing books narrated by the author, like Barbara Streisand or Michelle Obama.
Yeah, I can't recommend that enough. I've got so many ideas going on here. Those are amazing ideas, though. To your point, audiobooks, they're a huge thing. For me, audiobooks are a way to help get through a book if it's difficult. I'll talk about that a little bit. the Kindle. I regularly read books that I need to read for various reasons, right? I read Dare to Lead a couple of years ago, which was important. I really wanted to learn more about leadership and all this kind of stuff. And so I paired it with that audiobook so you can kind of go back and forth. Because as you know, Wendy, the number of times in an audiobook, especially when it's got technical content of some sort, and they go, and on page 43, we have this diagram, and you go, well, that's dead to me. So it is nice to have that piece. But yeah, I cannot stress enough. If you have tried audiobooks before and don't particularly like them, try some narrated by the author. Not only is it literally in their voice, but often they will add more to the book, and they will kind of go, well, I want to add this little anecdote. It's not in the book, but we'll talk about it anyway. So those are huge. My own personal kind of addendum to that list is things like replacing doom scrolling or any kind of social media with a chapter. If you've got a book, I highly recommend picking books with short chapters. There's a lot of really good books out there with like almost paragraph level chapters. And at least for me, and I don't know, you call it gamification, call it what you want. If I can say, I just got to read this one paragraph, and then I can go back to doom scrolling or whatever else I want to do in my life, it can really help just break up your day and kind of go, oh, I read a chapter. That wasn't so hard. Maybe I could do it again.
What is doom scrolling?
Just sitting on social media, just scrolling
Oh,
forever
I
and ever
see.
and ever.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Yes,
And so,
because recently, and I just wanted to mention that I just was listening to a wonderful podcast between Chelsea Handler and Mel Robbins. They were talking about what you call doom scrolling. That Mel Robbins was saying that a person on average nowadays, or young people, or in general, if you have more time than you think, are spending 6 hours a day doom
sounds about
scrolling.
right.
6 hours a day on social media. Here,
And that's
half
what-
an
so that's what
hour.
I'm saying.
There, 15 minutes. In bed at night when you go to bed, how long are you on? Like, I got rid of my TikTok app completely
Good.
because
Good on you.
I was scrolling for over 2 hours on TikTok. It's like, this is a total waste of time. What am I doing? So now I'm reading.
And that's what I'm saying.
and
This is what I find with a chapter. If you got to pick the right book. There's been books I've read recently where, and you probably know this kind of book. You're reading the book and you think, I really should go to work, or I really should go to bed, or I really should go do something. So you kind of go, where does the chapter end? And you start flicking and go, is this whole book one chapter? Like where is it? I can't.
Yeah. Well, that's
Right?
why I highlight stuff too.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
maybe don't pick those books. Over time, you'll learn to like just leave it off the top of the page if you can.
Yeah.
But if you can, pick a book with short chapters, and then you can have this moment where if you scroll on social media for half an hour, nothing happens, right?
Nope.
Whereas I typically will open social media, catch up on the 2 or 3 people that I follow and want to learn what's going on in their lives. And then I hit, okay, well, that's the end of that. Before I keep scrolling, let me just go read one chapter, clear my head, and then, I'm going to go for a walk instead. So that's another one. On that note, don't worry about what you're reading, right? No judgment here, right? There's the old trope where people would be holding up a Shakespeare book and you kind of reach over their shoulder and they've got another magazine on the inside. If you want to read graphic novels, go for it. If you want to read Harry Potter in your 60s, go for it. They're good books. Go read them. Just read something. It's, at least for me, it's a sense of accomplishment when I've got a new story. But then on top of that, you can get exposed to new ideas and new things that you can actually look at. And they're real. Pieces.
Even and I had to think about what I mentioned before, the book Want, and I can't remember the name of the author, but growing up there were some great articles in Playboy, Playgirl magazines. There was some great reading there too, right?
That's also the joke, right? I only get it for the stories, right? The works.
That's just for the story. So yeah, so if you don't like a book, put it down. Life's too short, right?
Exactly, right? Like, and that is really empowering when you get a book from somebody and they say you should read this, and you get 3 chapters in, or even 1 chapter, and you're going, really, I don't like this. And if they say, oh no, but it's really, really good, you got to get to 2nd chapter, give it the 2nd chapter, but then stop reading it. And that's why I say track your pages, not your books. We're going to talk about tracking apps later, But
Yeah.
track the quantity of reading, not necessarily the quality, right? Quality is not that important. You can work up to quality, but I know, as I said, I did not read for a good chunk of my childhood because I didn't think I was reading the right books and I wasn't reading the right things. Once you get past the quality piece, then you can start looking at, sorry, the quantity piece, then you can start looking at the quality piece.
Yeah.
And then find a place to write things down, whether it's a note, whether it's a database, whatever it is, that when somebody says, hey, Wendy, you should read this book. Thanks. I'm 12 books on my queue right now. I'm putting it at the bottom, moving it up, whatever, to write it down, because I can tell you from experience, there is nothing worse in the world than finishing a book and going, what do I read next? And then you pick up this random book, you get 4 chapters in, and then you go, right, I was going to read that book Wendy mentioned. Okay, I'll finish this book first. I finish the book and I go, I'll read this thing. Crap, Wendy's book again. And it just never happens. So make a queuing system of some sort. So you at least keep track of it.
When I'm having a conversation at the local dog park and somebody says, I just read this or that book, I actually just look up the book and take a screenshot of the book on Amazon and put it in my read this book to-do list. I don't look up reviews at all, ever, about anything, because I don't believe in reviews. And this is the musician talking in me, because everybody has their own taste. If you like the book...
I'm going to disagree with you there, Wendy. I think you do believe in reviews, because if I told you a book was really, really good, you would go do it. And that's true. That's true.
Yes. You're right. And the whole point of this podcast is reviews.
But it's the personal connection, right?
Yes,
when I know when Oprah says you should read this book, take that with a grain of salt, unless you love everything Oprah does. When a good friend says, I think you would enjoy this book, give them a shot.
You're right. You're absolutely right. My sister recommended a very important book that I'm going to talk about in this podcast. And thank God she did, because I discovered a new author.
Yes. And my last little tip, and I'm going to share this because I think it's valuable to think about and see how it fits your life. I think there's a little bit of figuring out how books fit your life. Currently, I think you mentioned the same, that I read about 2 to 3 books at a time.
Yep. That's new for me too.
Which multitasking is terrible for you, but there's a reason for it. I typically read one sci-fi, fantasy, escapism, something interesting that I want to read, it's a lot of Asimov right now. I'll talk about that in a second. Some kind of sci-fi book. And I read those, over coffee in the morning, when I'm out camping, things like that. I read one for learning, something that I need to read. Right? Something I'm trying to enrich what I know about, or I'm trying to read something about physics, something I'm trying to learn more. That typically is an ebook, because I can pull it up anywhere and I can read a little bit of it as I'm going through it, because I typically can't read very much of it at a time. And then I also listen to an audiobook from time to time. Audiobooks to me, and we're going to talk about this more in a second, audiobooks to me are work I'm trying to do or trying to multitask. More on that in a second, because our next segment, Wendy, is
audiobooks versus physical books. So let's settle it. Audiobooks versus physical books. I adore the feel of a real book, but audiobooks, total game changer for me. And they brought books into my life in a way I never thought possible.
Yep. And I like both. As I said, I kind of got back into books through physical books. Audiobooks have opened a new door for me. So what I typically will use audiobooks for is I use books for multitasking. 2 places I do this is, 1, I play video games from time to time. And I have found that a lot of biographies especially. Some people, like I read Barack Obama's book. I've read Steve Jobs, things like this. I find their biographies fascinating. I find biographies absolutely fascinating. However, humans are boring. Every so often you'll be listening about this enterprise they're building and the trials and problems they have, and then they go on for 2 chapters about going for lunch with this one person who is inconsequential as far as I can tell. And I kind of just like, whoa, I got to read this. And it's really, really hard to get through it on a physical book. And you kind of think, can I just skip this chapter? You totally can, totally allowed. But if I'm playing a video game, I can kind of phase out for a little bit. And then when they come back to something I want interesting in, I can come back in. I've also started doing this hiking, which is bizarre. I'm aware. But when you're out on your own, hiking for 10, 15 kilometers, sometimes you just need a little bit of companionship, and listening to somebody talk through their life, I find fascinating. So it works for me. So I have found that really good. And then also I found audiobooks. As I said, I read Dare to Lead a while ago by Brene Brown. Really fascinating concepts and theories. I've also read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence Others. I'm going to get the title wrong. And both of those books I found very difficult to get through, but having the audiobook along with a physical book, I could have the two of them kind of force my way through it. So yeah, audiobooks, I as I said, I listen to them to try to think through hard concepts and help me focus and push me through. I do listen to them, not necessarily at twice the speed, but at faster speeds. Often podcasts, I'll go to like 1.2. Depends on how good the engine is to keep up with it. Mostly so that it can kind of travel at the same pace as my brain, because I find some people, Barack Obama was one for sure. His speaking style is very slow and methodical. Yeah. And he has good ideas, but part of me is thinking about the Slow Talkers America skit from the 1960s. And so sometimes I'll speed it up a little bit just to keep me focused, because my mind tends to wander. So
yeah. Well, we wanted to add a new section to these podcasts and have a lot more of a listening sort of audience participation. So we have a little poll here. Are you team audiobook, team physical book, team Kindle, team all of the above plus, and thank you. So the listener challenge is, what is your all-time favorite audiobook and who narrated it? And leave us a message on Instagram, DM us, or a voice message, or whatever you like, that we might feature in our next episode.
That'd be great. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So what's the next segment?
So next, we've been kind of dancing around it, and we do this every single time. So why not talk about our list? What is the things that are important to us?
Yeah. What we've read, what we've loved, and it's, let's get back to our namesake chapter, our list.
I had a hard time with this list, Wendy. I got to tell you, I have read a lot of books that have kind of meant a lot to me in the last couple of years. I have not stuck to our format of 5. We're up at 10 already, and even some of them are combined into multiple items. But yeah, there's a lot. I'm going to start with something big, and then I'll kind of rapid fire through some of these things. My first thing I got to start with is Isaac Asimov, and specifically the robot series. Isaac Asimov has written a few books, like over 700. So if you're planning on reading them all, knock yourself out. I am going to try.
Wow. How many of these books have you read?
Probably about 30 or 40 so far. There's a lot.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And it's just, there's just so much in there. It's pivotal. Isaac Asimov is the creator of the 3 Laws of Robotics, the idea of a positronic brain, a whole host of ideas to do with robots. The whole robot series, I think, is 15 or 16 books. There's the Foundation series, which is the core kind of 3 books, and it extends in both directions. It is a whole world building, amazing thing. I was super lucky to really get introduced to the whole robot series through a book called The Naked Sun, which I read in 2020, which if you've read the book, you realize this is a big deal, because in the book, The Naked Sun, I'm not going to do any spoilers, but I'm just going to give you a basic premise. A lot of the book is about the idea between seeing and viewing somebody, right? Wendy, you and I are viewing each other right now. Maybe sometime soon we'll have some board games and some coffee, and we'll actually see each other. Reading a book debating and discussing this topic in 2020 as the pandemic lockdown stuck us all in our houses and we could only view people. Oh boy, did it change my world. This was the beginning for me into the Isaac Asimov robot series and the Foundation series. I could go on forever. It is a fascinating world of understanding and thinking about robots. And then you realize this guy started writing this stuff in 1940.
Wow.
There is a book, which I highly recommend if you want to just have a brief little insight into this world. He wrote a short story called The Feeling of Power about a future where maybe humans could also do computation. He wrote this book in 1958. This is a guy who went, hey, look, computers. Imagine if computers took over the world far off in the future. We'd forgotten how computers even work. And then humans remember things. Just incredible foresight. You read it now and you think, oh, this is a cool sci-fi book. But then you realize the context and the place he wrote it in is just amazing. Feeling of Power is available through the Internet Archive and the Gutenberg Project. So it is kind of open source-ish. I don't know how much his publishers like that, but it is. If you like any of these, if you want to read more about it, I will talk for days about Isaac Asimov. I think it's fantastic. It is a whole rabbit hole.
I'm speechless because I've never ever heard of this, but I'm very intrigued. Like you said, when you know a person and have a relationship with a person and you're friends with this person and they recommend a book, you're like, okay, I'm going to try that. Oprah, not necessarily.
Well, and you know,
Heather's picks at Indigo, not necessarily, but I am going to add that to my list. The Feeling of Power.
And you know this world too, right? This is the world of Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Heinlein, Frank Herbert, Philip K. Dick. It's that whole H.G. Wells, Jules Verne. This is the same group of people. Isaac Asimov was part of the later group. There's other people before that. These are kind of like the big sci-fi writers, and they wrote amazing stuff.
Cool.
I'm pretty confident most people have seen a movie. I, Robot was a movie years ago. We'll talk more about those in the future. Anyway, moving on. Other books. That was a lot. I could talk about that. We should have a whole. I'll have a whole episode someday on Asimov.
Well, no one will listen, but anyway.
No, exactly. Who cares? Not my problem.
This is the podcast for us.
Yes. Let me go through the rest of my books. So my second book, big one, was The Martian by Andy Weir. This was originally self-published on his blog and then just kind of blew up, became a movie, a best-selling book, and all this kind of stuff. I read The Martian kind of out of like, hey, this seems to be a big hype. People seem to be excited about this. I'll read it. I read it. I thought, I kind of like this. I poked around. He also wrote Artemis and possibly one of my favorite books of all time, Project Hail Mary. Andy Weir, if you're listening, please write more books. I love his style. I love the way he writes. I love the character. It feels like you're actually there and you're talking to real people and it's not just written. It feels like a real account. That was amazing. A book that's really special to me recently is a book called I Am Legion, I Am Bob by Dennis E. Taylor. It is kind of a hidden gem, and I stumbled onto it. Kind of a sad story. I had a friend die recently, which was really difficult. And a couple months after that, I was looking through my reading list, trying to find a book to read again. And I noticed I had a recommendation from this same book in the list. And I thought, you know what? I should probably read this book. Would have been nice if I talked to him about it, but better now than never. And so I read it. And it really hit home because it's all about AI and struggles with world society and cultures and all this kind of stuff, but also about dying. Spoiler, the main character dies in the first chapter.
Oh, dear. Okay.
And there's multiple books on this. It is a hidden gem. It's one of these books that if you read reviews on it, everybody says all the pieces of this book are out there. We all know these pieces and nobody's put them together in this way. It is an incredible book. I highly recommend it. It is, and again, the title is just wonderful. I Am Legion, I Am Bob.
Interesting.
Another important book to me. I started my journey on reading. My dad originally gave me the first Guy Gavriel Kay book. I'm going to probably butcher the title, Tigana. It's a Canadian writer. Fantastic world building. These books are, I would argue, even an inspiration. I would love to know the history here. Very similar to the Game of Thrones style writing, where you travel, you have one chapter with one character, and then another chapter with a totally different, unrelated character, and another chapter with another, different time and place. And then over the book, you start realizing these worlds are kind of overlapping in weird and wonderful ways, and just amazing world builder. Fantastic series of books. Tigana was my kind of introduction to that. I've mentioned Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy before. This was kind of my launch into readings. If you haven't read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you have to read this. Wendy, I've told you this 100 times. You have
Well,
to
I
go read.
actually started reading the book. I got about halfway and then I put it down because I kind of got bored.
That is totally fair. That is totally fair because Hitchhiker's Guide is one of these books where it is a trilogy in 5 parts, as they say on the title, which, yes, I'm aware that's not how trilogies work. Douglas Adams, I recently read his biography, which was just phenomenal reading through his stuff. But The Hitchhiker's Guide, the first book, has the key points, but none of it makes sense until you've read all 5. There's this
Okay.
famous story with Douglas Adams in, I think it's the 3rd book. There's a bowl of petunias. That's it. And the publisher said, this is ridiculous. It doesn't contribute to the storyline. Take it out. It's a whole chapter that does nothing. The publisher said, this is useless. Take it out. And Douglas said, no. So they left it in. And 4 books later, it's the whole point of the book series.
Oh, okay.
And just a wonderful writer. So if you've heard of the number 42 coming up anywhere useful, if you've ever asked what the meaning of life, the universe, and everything is, Hitchhiker's Guide has all your answers. It is wonderful. If you like his stuff, he also wrote the Dirk Gently series, which is the same vein of crazy. It's amazing. A couple more recommendations. Tao of Pooh, or Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff. I'm not a traditionally religious person. Never really connected there, but I do have something. And I found Taoism is the closest thing to me. It speaks to me. It feels right. There's a famous line in the book, or a famous line from Winnie the Pooh, where Winnie the Pooh goes into a forest and it's, we're lost. And it's like, no, we're here.
Right.
And it's this idea of,
I think the title of the book is cute and
Yes.
it's very interesting. Like you pick it up and you're like, what?
and it's all about this connection between religion and Winnie the Pooh, right? Taoism, which is a very much Winnie the Pooh approach to life. Things happen. World goes on. You do what you can. It's great. I love it. I've read it. I've actually, one of the few books I've probably read twice. Couple quick mentions. I mentioned before biographies. I find biographies fascinating, listening to other people. The one that got me into it was Finding My Virginity by Richard Branson. He is a interesting person. And reading his biography and where he got to where he did, you always hear about these multi-billionaires and rich people and what did they do to get there? Spoiler, it's a lot of illegal stuff. But the risks they took, the adventures they took, and just seeing into somebody's life, it's really fascinating. Again, highly recommend audiobooks for these kind of things. I read it as a physical book, but it took a lot out of me to read through it. Really good biographies. I have a long list of science and math and stats books, which I'm sure nobody wants to hear. If you're interested, I have a list. But my two excellent recommendations to get into science and math books are The Data Detective by Tim Harford. It is almost, I tell my students, it's almost an essential read right now. And I do walk them through the book during my stats class, because The Data Detective is how to read data in our modern world and make it useful, right? How to be critical, how to think about all of that research you read on TikTok while sitting on the toilet. It's fantastic. And Humble Pie is a wonderful book. Matt Parker from Numberphile fame. Wonderful idea into how the world works and how the kind of world messes up. And if you're interested in math at all, it is kind of fascinating. If, however, books are not your thing, I'm going to put one last recommendation in here, and that is the What If blog. It's written by Randall Monroe. He's also written it out as a really nice book. But the What If blog is something he came up with years ago to go on top of his comic, XKCD, where people would ask questions. And as a former rocket scientist, literally, he goes through the math and the science of a thing. So somebody asked, could you deliver a pizza on a bird? And he went through the science and physics of how you would do such a thing. What would happen if the moon exploded? He goes through the science and math of how that would unfold over time. It is a wonderful blog. If you're interested in science and math, I highly recommend checking it out.
Well, wow. I feel like I was just in class with a professor, because the
Yes.
interesting thing about this particular topic that we're talking about, books as compared to movies or TV shows, is that the books that you just recommended just gave much more insight into who you are, Cameron, what you like, and how your mind is working. Because the thing about books that's so interesting for me is that when you're watching a movie, you're in that magical space for 1 or 2 hours when you're watching the movie. When you're watching a TV series, you're in a magical space for 1 hour, 45 minutes, or whatever the thing is. When you're reading a book, and we've talked about this before, it is a actual dedicated thing that you need to do for 20 hours or more of the same thing. So in order to stay engaged and interested for more than 20 hours in doing one thing, like reading a book from front to back, you have to be actually it has to be something that you are deeply, deeply interested in. And as compared to being deeply, deeply interested in a 2-hour movie, you can take it, you can talk about it. But a book is kind of like eating a meal for 20 hours or 40 hours. It has to be delicious. It has to be engaging. It has to be something that you're really, really interested in.
And I think I missed a note I made to myself I want to talk about before I unloaded my giant list at you, Wendy, and all of our listeners. Book recommendations, they're a thing. And I've just unloaded a list of 9 or 10 books at you, which to me would be like a cardinal rule never to do.
Right.
We talked about it on our TV show. I was in a meeting the other day chatting with some friends, and somebody said, "Oh, I watched this show." And then people were just firing off, "Oh, and this one, and this one, and this one." And within the space of about 15 minutes, I'm sure they listed 25 television shows. And we talked about this last time. For somebody who watches one episode of a TV show, maybe a week, getting 20 recommendations, I just phased out, tuned everything out.
Yeah.
And so for all of our listeners out there who are thinking, you know what, I've read one good book since 2019. And suddenly Cameron comes along and goes, here's 9 books you have to read immediately. Dude, shut up.
Yeah,
I totally hear you. Right?
No,
And so hopefully one of these books spoke to you. Hopefully not all the books spoke to you. I did put them in the order that are most powerful and most important to me. But yeah, book recommendations in general. You would never walk up to somebody and say, hey, here's 12 books I think you should read.
Yet we do listen to people like Oprah, or we walk into an Indigo store and it says Heather's Picks, and you go over and pick it, or you go to the book talk table and pick it because somebody on TikTok suggested that you need to read it. It takes a big dedication in your life to read a book because there's so many things get distracted. It's a multimedia, multi-distraction lifestyle right now, and that we are so easily distracted. That famous cartoon Ice Age, where the squirrel is chasing after
I love that.
acorn. Or, I go for a walk with my dog and I just see squirrel, and she goes running that direction. Squirrel, she runs that direction. So that's what our life is like right now.
Yeah. And that's where books are different. It makes me think books are very different in the sense that they're a commitment, which is different from other places, right? So with books, if you give me another book to read, it goes on the bottom of my list of 40 books I want to read the next year.
Yeah.
Never going to happen. On the flip side, things like podcasts, for instance, me getting a new podcast recommendation, I have currently at the number of podcasts such that I can get through them in about a week or so and keep caught up to my weekly podcasts.
Right.
So adding a new podcast means I must get rid of something else.
Right.
And I think this is similar to books, right? If somebody says you should read this book, does it come all the way up in the queue? Do you put down your current book? Where does it come up, right?
Well, maybe if you're at that point where you just finished a book and then you heard Wendy or Cameron talk about this or that book,
Exactly.
maybe that book would give you the incentive to go to the library or go to Indigo and pick up the book or buy it on Amazon. So we're going to go to my list. Does that sound
Yes.
cool?
Go for it.
Okay, my list is cozy, cool, and Canadian for sure. So, again, to remind our listeners, I basically started reading 3 years ago. That's it. So this first book was recommended to me, or this first author was recommended to me by my sister. So just about, the most read person that I have in my life is my older sister, Enika, who has read, I think, 20,000 books in her lifetime. So, all the Inspector Gamache novels by Louise Penny. Fantastic Canadian crime fiction book. Chief Inspector Gamache basically is just part of the whole series, The Family. And Chief Inspector Gamache is about a Quebec policeman, chief of police in Quebec. And her books are fabulous. You can't put them down. They're so much fun to read. And that's the key. I need fun and entertainment in my books, similar to fun and entertainment in my movies and TV shows, because I'm relatively new at reading. So that's basically why. And I think there's so much going on in your life. When I pick up a book and I've been reading it for maybe a week or two, I need to remember where I left off. I need to remember what this story is about if you're going to be reading 1 or 2 chapters at a time. I lately make time about an hour a day to read, and that's usually in the afternoon. So the next book I want to recommend, also another Canadian, our very own Canadian astronaut, Chris Hadfield. He has written a couple of books, for example, The Apollo Murders. The Apollo Murders actually has been recently picked up by Hollywood. They're going to turn his book into a film.
Oh, wow.
It's so amazing, this book, because Chris Hadfield, who started as a pilot, actually he wrote a children's book about himself, about dreaming to become an astronaut, and it came true. What a great concept. Write a children's book about your dream, and it actually comes true. So Chris Hadfield, a Canadian astronaut who has been in space and has been to the International Space Station for many, many months, he wrote this great series about space, espionage, and he knows everything and anything about what zero gravity feels like. He knows what the inside of an astronaut of a spaceship looks like. So they're great,
Very cool.
great fun books to read. I highly recommend them. The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield. Next, again, thriller kind of series. We have all the Dan Brown books. Probably a lot of people have seen ads on their social media feeds that Dan Brown is coming up with another book very soon. He doesn't write very many books. And I think the reason why is because he does an incredible amount of research into these books, like a lot of research. And so that's why there are not very many books. But the really cool thing about Dan Brown, of course, things like Angels and Demons or whatever, he's also written a children's book. And a lot of people don't know that Dan Brown is a very accomplished musician. He's a pianist and composer, and he wrote this wonderful children's book about it's called The Wild Symphony, and it's about all of these animals that play instruments. And each page of the book has an accompanying piece of music. So there's like a QR code at the beginning of the book. You scan it, and it turns it into an app. And while you're reading the book, you are listening to a little piece of music to accompany each page. So it's brilliant. It's a brilliant way to get kids interested. Had there been a book like that for me when I was a kid where a book is accompanied by music, I think it's brilliant. So we'll just move on to my nonfiction recommendations. We have Becoming the Light We Carry from Michelle Obama, which doesn't need an explanation. She's fantastic. A Promised Land by Barack Obama. It's insightful and amazingly fun because it's narrated by Barack himself, and the same with Michelle Obama. She narrates the book herself because, again, all of the books I read are Audible. And then a fantastic book that was recommended to me, and I can't remember who recommended it to me. Oh, it was Cameron. Yay, Cameron. Yearbook from Seth Rogen. Seth Rogen, a Canadian actor who grew up in Vancouver. He wrote this wonderful book that is hilarious to read, but also hilarious to read while you listen to him actually narrate the book to you. Because
And he's an excellent example of what I was talking about. He goes off script regularly, right?
Yeah.
Like, this isn't in the book. I'm just going to,
Yeah. And and then takes me to some biographies. The famous father girl, Jamie Bernstein, who is the daughter of Leonard Bernstein, wrote this fantastic, fascinating glimpse into the life of what it's like to live with Leonard Bernstein being your father. And actually, the recent book about the recent movie about Leonard Bernstein is based on her book, A Famous Father Girl, from Jamie Bernstein. Another book I last year finished was My Name is Barbara, from Barbara Streisand book that she narrates herself. It's over 40 hours long, and that's the great thing about Audible and about Kindle. You know how many more minutes are in each chapter, or you know how long the book is, because it's fantastic. But it's worth every minute because Barbara actually sings in the Audible. Like when she's talking about Funny Girl, she starts singing songs from Funny Girl. Another book that I read, simply because everybody was reading it, was Spare from Prince Harry. Prince Harry reads it to you, and he reads the entire chapter about his frostbitten penis as well.
Nice.
And lastly, because I love fun books and humor, Rick Mercer. Rick Mercer is a very funny Canadian comedian. He's had his own television show on CBC. He's originally from Newfoundland. He's hilarious, and he's our national treasure. So Rick Mercer, all of his books, great.
You made me think of something this list is just making me think of so many interesting and fascinating things. The Seth Rogen book, like that. Yeah. Great book. I read that hiking through France last year. But your first book made me remember something that maybe you've possibly missed out a little bit on. And I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing. But when it comes to sci-fi and fantasy books, one of the things that I find as a reader very difficult is talking to other people. Because you'll read a book and then somebody will say, oh, what do you think about this character? And you'll go, they're not in the book. And then they'll open the book and they'll point to a word and you'll go, that is not what was going on in my head. Because when I read a fantasy book, one of two things happens. Either I pronounce it, and I've noticed certain words. For instance, I mentioned Tigana, which again, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it right. When I was pronouncing in my head reading it, I think there was like there was something else. There was another word going on in my head. But then some complex names, especially the ones with like weird serifs and everything else, I have noticed I will read the word, but I am one of those people that I hear things in my head when I'm reading. But the name doesn't make any sound. It just is as a visual placeholder. And I know who that character is, but I've never said that name out loud. And so when you were saying Inspector Gamache, I was thinking, is that right? Is there a right? Does it matter? Because when you read fantasy books, often they will make up words. And if you're not listening to the audiobook, you have no idea of knowing which way it was. I remember a good example of this, talking about books. My dad used to read Tintin to me as a kid. And then they had a Tintin television story. And I can tell you for a fact, their voices are wrong.
That's hilarious. Well, you know, and the interesting thing in her most recent, Louise Penny's recent book, The Gray Wolf, I think it's called, she, right at the beginning of the audiobook, she announced that she has a new narrator that she hired who is quite a famous Quebec actor. And this Quebec actor was able to pronounce all of the French words in the book properly,
Wonderful.
in the Quebecan way. So I only know him as an Inspector Gamache because that's the way they say it in the book,
Exactly.
in the audible version. I mean,
Yeah.
Gamache is maybe when I would see the just say it myself. But again, when I read, I do not hear the words in my head. Like you just mentioned, you hear the words in your head. I don't.
And talking about like right or wrong, there is a town in the United States. I'm trying to think of the exact name of it, called Versailles. It's written exactly the same way as the town in France called Versailles, but it is called Versailles.
Oh,
And it's
no.
just like, and so and it's just localized, right? There's the movie K-Pax, right? We talked about movies a while ago, but I'll bring it up. In the movie K-Pax, halfway through the movie, they look at a map and they go, there it is. He's in that town, Guelph. And I pause and I zoom in on the thing. Yeah, that does say Guelph.
Oh,
So,
well, that's
yeah,
that's the butchering names like names of cities and towns in our country of Canada, Mississauga.
It's interesting to talk when you're reading books and you're on your own, you're reading through your book, whether you have a dialogue in your head or you don't. There's a moment where somebody says, "Did you read that book with this character?" And you suddenly go, "I've never heard it said that way." That
Yeah.
is never, even titles that you kind of go, "Oh, that's not what I was thinking in my head." So I
Yeah.
was just thinking about that while you're talking, that like
Yeah.
if you're reading a book, you can very easily read a whole series and not know what the main character is actually called,
Nope.
because it is not important when you're reading the book on your own.
I guess not. I guess not. So that brings us to the last part of this section, our listener shout out. So what about you? What are you reading right now? So let us know. And, what's your latest page turner, audiobook obsession, graphic novel crush? We might feature you in our next episode.
So, what are you reading, Wendy? Let's start there. Let's start with what we're actually reading. Wendy, what are you reading right now?
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to go into 3 books that I'm reading right now, and it sounds chaotic, but hear me out. And it's exactly interesting thing. This is a new concept for me because I'm reading 3 books at once. And kind of a similar sort of thing, what you mentioned earlier about how you're feeling, what time of day it is, what you feel like, if you're down, if you're up, if you're happy, if you're sad, put your foot in the ring, whatever. If you're happy and you know it, bum. Right. So right now I'm reading The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. Me and about 4 million other people in this world are reading the book right now. It's just a fantastic sort of self-help kind of, let them. I've been struggling a lot with politics recently, and this book has really helped me with turning off that noise and thinking about the word let them. Just let them do whatever. I
That's
can't change
wonderful.
anything. My Life in France by Julia Child. So that is basically a fantastic, entertaining book about Julia Child, her life in France, enrolling in the cooking school, the Cordon Bleu. And it's just entertaining, fun, fantasy kind of world. Like, oh, how that would be wonderful to live in France right now and just enjoy all this wonderful food. And then because of the recent situation here in Canada and our prime minister right now, our new prime minister, Mark Carney, I'm reading his books. I want to know what he's about and why he wrote this book. He wrote this book just after the pandemic. It's called Values. It's an extremely difficult book for me to read. I can only read like 1 or 2 pages at a time. It's it. But I just let it sink in and try to understand it. And, it's good for me. It's just, I need to know more about this man and who he is. And that's it. So, yeah, those are my 3 books that I'm reading right now.
Those are fantastic, and they're exact. They fit my pattern, right?
Yeah.
I can't articulate it particularly well, but you can see there's one book that's just like fun, airy, interesting. I want to read about this, learn something. I'm going to guess that's your Julia Child, My Life in France book.
Yeah.
You've got one book where you need to read it, right? That's Mark Carney's. That's the audiobook where you just kind of listen to it, and every once in a while nothing really happens and it kind of phases out, but you need to get through it. And then you've got the like almost for work book, right? Let them, right? I want to get something out of this. I'll get through it when I can. And that's, I think what I'm trying to articulate there is, to me, Let Them is the book you're reading, right? And you've got it first. And that, but you can only read like a page or two of that before your brain explodes and you think, I gotta sit on this for a couple hours. Yep. So you go read My Life in France, and it's fun and it's airy and you have fun with it. And eventually you think, I gotta do something serious. I gotta learn something, but I don't want to go back to the serious books. I'm still thinking about it. And that's where that third book kind of fills that gap. And so it's not a bad pattern. I wonder how many people are reading 3 books.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a new phenomenon for me, because it's like, okay, I want to read this book, but hey, why can't I read them all at the same time? I don't think I can do more than 3. I think probably 3 is about it. But I guess I have the brain space or the memory to be able to do it. And I must admit that the thing that I've noticed, the more I read, the more I'm remembering. I think it's better for my brain to read than to watch TV 24/7. It's better to actually use your brain and read.
And I think you're right. I would be surprised if you could do more. If I could do more than 3 books, because you'd have 2 books in the same brain space, right? You sit down in the afternoon. It's nice out. You just want to read something fun. Do I read this fun book or that fun book? No, one fun book. That is the limit, right? That, at least in my brain, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's something that's, I like to really intentionally carve out at least 1 hour a day for reading. And it's usually around 3 or 4 o'clock. I always make myself a cup of tea, and I always have it accompany a nice cookie with it, or a Dutch stroopwafel or something. And I read for an hour. And the reading, again, is with Audible and Kindle together, or a physical book. And, when I was discovering, I keep track of a good tracking tool for my books. I use Goodreads, which is part of Amazon. And what I've noticed recently, and I was looking at the Goodreads page, is that in the last 3 years, I have read 35 books. Thank you. Which is quite amazing. When I was like, holy cow, did I read that many? Wow, that's incredible. And I'm looking at the images of the books, and I'm like, yeah, I remember what that was about. Yeah, I remember that was about, it's really interesting.
Yeah. I use Goodreads as well. And Goodreads has been a way to kind of go, I don't feel like I'm reading a lot. Oh, wait, I read all these things, right? And you can remember them. Even the other day, I was thinking, I really haven't read that many books this year. Wait, I've read 5? Oh, yeah, I guess I did read those as books this year. So it's nice to, it gives you, it's probably that gamification brain, right? That like, I've done something, I've got a limit or whatever. But it is nice to kind of see, I've read some stuff.
Well, and to be honest, we used to call my older sister, she's a bookworm, but I think I'm a bookworm now too. I mean, I just think I am a reader, I guess.
Yep.
I just haven't found the right format or the right way to do it.
Yep, exactly.
So what are you reading right now, Cameron?
So currently I'm kind of between books. I just finished 1 book last week, and I'm only on 2 right now. I just haven't had the brain space or space for that 3rd audiobook. But currently I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is kind of my go-to workbook. Last couple of years, I've been working really closely with our Indigenous faculty and Indigenous community, trying to learn more. I recommend everybody should go learn more. My current go-to, if you're thinking Indigenous, what's Indigenous and what's going on? Start with something simple. My recommendation is a website called whose.land, and you can learn whose land you're currently working on. It's interesting. Canada has had a difficult past with Indigenous people. We're getting somewhere. It's something. So that's my book I'm currently reading. I try to read a book every couple of months on something Indigenous so I can learn a little bit more. This book is a wonderful collection of different stories and ideas. It's worth a read. Obviously, I have a long pile of books coming. I've just finished an Asimov book, and I'm reading a new Asimov book. Shocker. I just finished reading Positronic Man, which is actually the first book in the Robot series. Yes, I'm kind of reading them out of order. And I've moved on to David Starr Space Ranger, which is a book written under the pseudonym Paul French, also by Isaac Asimov. Very fascinating. I've actually got a bit of a reading journey ahead. So I haven't read a lot currently, but I've got a reading journey ahead in that I've been trying to find one book out of the Asimov series, the Robots and Empire book. Could not find it to save my life. And last year finally ordered a whole pile of books in the United States up from a company that had them shipped in, everything else. So I've got a whole shipment pile of books to get through this year. And more recommendations coming every day. But that is what I'm reading right now.
That's amazing. And I had to think about this for a moment because I was like, wait a minute, when you're talking about Indigenous, because, 50 years ago, people were not reading books or thinking about the Indigenous peoples, and certainly not reading books about Indigenous peoples. And I recently, I don't know where I heard about it, but the premier of Manitoba, he's written a couple of books, Wab Kinew. Yep. And again, this is like, I just Googled right now, Premier of Ontario, Mr. Canoe, Canoe. I'm like, why is nothing coming up? And then all of a sudden I see it's Kinew, but I heard canoe, but it's pronounced canoe, but it's Kinew. Anyway, the point is, he wrote a very, very good book that was recommended to me, but I cannot remember who recommended it, called The Reason You Walk, a memoir. And apparently it's a fantastic book to read. Another book that he wrote is called Walking in Two Worlds. So, and he's also written a children's book. So, we can add it to the list for sure.
For sure.
And, let me see. So, so we have our listener prompt again, and that we basically would love to hear what you're reading right now. And we're coming to the end of our podcast. Final thoughts for today would be what, Cameron?
Go read something. That would be my final thoughts. Go read something. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah.
I think books are a difficult topic for the list because, our purpose with the list is, oh my God, how have you made it this far? How have you not done or seen or whatever?
Yeah.
Books are a big commitment though.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of books out there that are really powerful, that are really, really interesting, that you should go. And so find the right time, find the right space to have a friend and say, hey, you need to go read this book. This one's important, or this one's important, because they are really, really important. There's some really, really good books out there that do mean a lot. Having said that, I think books more than other mediums. We talked about this last time on TV shows and on movies as well. Books more than anything, when you start realizing why you love a book, you start to realize, oh, right, I was living away from home. I picked this book up. It really spoke to me at that time. It has more emotional and more extra meaning, which means that when you make a recommendation to somebody else, they might not see it, right? Like I said, I read Naked Sun in 2020 as the pandemic is crashing down around us, and it started this journey for me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if anybody else is going to see it. I would argue the books themselves are amazing and there's a lot in there, but you're not going to see it the same way, right? I get it.
And I see... And especially now with, the amounts of multimedia that we have around us, the amount of distraction that we have around us, and going back to our roots. And I'm always like looking back at period films or period shows. If we think something like Downton Abbey or Bridgerton or any of the classic movies where you see all of a sudden a person sitting quietly in their library with a candle, reading a book. Mm-hmm. And that kind of picture of this, this sort of simple thing. We didn't have TV. They didn't have radio in the 17th, 18th century. They had books. They had a way to escape to a fantasy place. And the interesting and wonderful thing about books is that you can create your own fantasy image in your head while you're reading the books. You can't do that when you're watching a TV show, and you cannot do that while you're watching a film, because the fantasy is already there as an image in front of you. Whereas when you're reading a book, it's your own image in your head, and it's your own fantasy, which is a great, entertaining thing to happen if you're really engaged in the book. Not if it's a dry, boring book about Canadian economics from like Mark Carney's book. But for sure, this book I'm reading right now, with My Life in France, I can imagine, Julia Child having a wonderful time cooking at the Cordon Bleu and learning how to prepare lobster or whatever. It's a great escapism. And so that's...
And this is why I think our next episode has to be combining all of these into one.
Right.
What books became movies, TV shows? Because I can think right off the top of my head, Asimov is one of these ones that doesn't always hit the mark. There are some that are really, really good. And it's that question of like, how is the book written? Whether it's escapism, whether it's trying to paint a picture, how does this go together? Does it work?
Yes.
Some did, some clearly don't.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because about I don't know how long ago, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I went to visit a friend in LA, and I went for a tour to Warner Brothers Studio. Oh, cool. And Warner Brothers, of course, was the movie company behind all the Harry Potter films. And there's a whole part of this tour where you look at all the stuff that were featured in the Harry Potter films. And what blew me away was from the floor to the ceiling of the scripts for one movie. Yep. So the adaptation script, I can't remember what it's called. There's a word for this. When a person writes the script for a movie, it's called a The script.
Not an adaptation?
The movie script adaptation, whatever.
Yeah.
So there's like from the floor to the ceiling of the different versions of this book that are adapted for a film. Mm-hmm. So it's not one book, it's 300 books that are like full books that are written, because this Let Them theory, which I'm reading right now from Mel Robbins, she wrote the book 11 times before it went to get published. Right. Entire manuscript was written 11 times. So that's how much work can go into a book, or that's how much work can go into adapting a script to turn it into a movie. Exactly. I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be great.
It's going to be good.
Yeah. So this has been great. Thanks everybody for joining us today. And again, if you want to find us, we're on Instagram, and Talk the List is our Instagram handle, and
all the social medias. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much, Cameron, and have a great day, and enjoy your book reading, everybody.
Go grab a good book and have a good read.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye for now.
Bye for now.